y'all? Happy Friday, and welcome back to another Golden Record track breakdown, where today we're going to be talking about the 10th track off of the album, Propulsion. Now, this song had to get us out of anger and move us more towards happiness. So the whole idea behind it is what you can do when you harness that kind of anger and use it in a beneficial and productive way. There's all kinds of big orchestral noises in here, as well as some fat drums. So let's go ahead and dive into the production of Propulsion. Alright, now that we're in Ableton, you can tell pretty quickly that as big and as grand sounding as this piece is, there aren't too many individual components happening in it. We have 3 different keys, which are piano parts doing something. We have our orchestral section, and then we have our drums. And each thing in there isn't doing anything too complicated. It's more so just there propelling, see what I've done, the other parts forward. So we could not start with this song without talking about these drums. So let's just hear them right off the top. Big, fat, it really sets the mood. I wanted, coming out of anger, I wanted this song to feel like it was hitting the ground running, feet on the pavement. You're in the shit, there's bullets whizzing past you, you're doing what you can, and that is the purpose of it. It's all about taking that shit that's been thrown at you and harnessing it in a way that makes you undeniably better than everyone else around you. So with these drums, it's composed of this big old drum loop and the kick. And the kick is basically just a simple kick underneath the loop of the initial drum loop. And it's just following the same pattern. So you can hear the kick. And then you can hear the drum. And you can really see the EQ in that. Oh man, we're really kicking the shit out of the low end with this. That's because I really wanted this big and beefy, and more than anything, I wanted you as a listener to feel this song, maybe more than hearing it at times. So that's why we have these big old drums and this kick starting us off right at the top. You can hear them together. Then we bring in some claps. So let's go ahead and we're just going to solo our drum section and listen to the claps come in. And that's got a really great sample on it. But that's it. It's the same loop. It's the same loop the entire time for the most part. Those claps are in there. And there again, it's all about layering in this one. We're taking a thing, introducing it to you, and then adding another thing on top of that. So much of this song is layered elements all coming together to create sort of one more cohesive sound. So you can see that the big drum and the kick are basically together the entire time, with a little bit of an exception of our breakdown period. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. The next element of our drum section is this percussive section in here. I really like that percussive loop. I had actually used it once before when I was working on our Drawtober. It was a thing, or I did a Beattober, if you're familiar with my Instagram, where me and my partner H Creates, we went and basically they made a piece of art, and then I made a piece of music that accompanied that art. We will be doing that again this year if you enjoyed that, so I'm excited to dive back into that. But this percussive, and actually these claps too, both of these were used in our sort of field party bit. I don't remember what we called it, but yeah, it was like a party in a pumpkin patch. You hear and just that is there's a lot of energy in that percussion and clap, and you bring in the kick. Right? That's the thing. Let's hit it. So yeah, that's essentially the drum section. You can tell there's nothing else added in there. We do have these shakers just a little bit. I lied a little. And they come in, they come in right before we go into our breakdown moment. And it just adds another little sense of urgency, that extra little bit of propulsion into that breakdown. So we'll listen to them soloed, and then you can hear them all coming in together. Just a simple shaker loop. There's nothing too complicated about this. It's something that I just grabbed my little shaker right off my desk and just, you just bang it out. You get it. You really don't need to look too much further than the things that are around you sometimes. And that was a lesson that I pulled from regularly throughout the entirety of this album. So many times I would be like, what does this need? And I would like grab something off the wall, or I'd just pull something off the desk and hold it up, and it, 9 times out of 10, it was what I needed. So those are our drums. That's the big element of that. Before we get into the orchestra, let's talk about the next major thing that you hear, which is our piano section. So as I said, we have 3 different key sections in this. We have our lead, we have our chord progression, and then we have what I call the space dinks. And these are just adding an extra little thing in there. We'll talk about them. It's a fun little texture that the harp will take over in our breakdown for. So with the piano chords, let's go ahead and just listen to what these sound like on their own. There's some really strong, classic kind of keys in here. Big piano. It just feels impactful, you know? Yeah, I really love the way there's a lot of presence in it. There's a lot of, low end in it. And so you get some of that more grounded, maybe angry, but harnessed anger. So that's our piano chords. They basically repeat the entire time throughout the whole song. And then they are accompanied by our piano lead, which I just played by myself. You can see I've done some slight chopping here at the top, and that's because I had come up with the melody for later on, but then I wanted to bring some of that in sooner without necessarily giving the whole melody away. So we'll listen to just what the melody sounds like, fully connected all on its own. Yeah, and there's some weird artifacts in there. As you could tell, my CPU usage went crazy high when I started playing that. And that's because there's a fair amount of effects on here. We have our ozone, which we've used before. I don't know if we've talked about it, though. This is a great mixing tool. I really like ozone. It comes from Isotope. We have the RC20 on it, obviously. And then, of course, we've also got some compression. We've got our side chain coming from the kick, and that's just to create more room for the kick. Then we've got a bit of EQ. I've boosted it in a certain frequency just to help that shine through a bit more. You can see what we've done to our side EQing here. And then there's a bit of utility just to help push the side or the mid frequencies a little further and a little further away from our side frequencies. So you can hear what this piano sounds like with the chords. They blend together phenomenally well, if I do say so myself. Yeah, and that was just me playing along on the piano. I would say that these chords and that piano lead, that melody, that was really the first thing I locked into after getting this drum part in. The drums were absolutely the beginning. They were the starting point of this song. I was pulling a lot from Woodkid. If you're familiar, you should. If you're not, check out Woodkid. If you like this kind of music, sort of big orchestral, brassy, things like that, definitely recommend him. He actually released an album back in 2020 that is fucking fire, man. I love the whole thing. Been a long time since he dropped music, but that's enough about Woodkid. This is about me, but go listen to Woodkid. But yeah, so Woodkid, great stuff, as well as, there's a bit of I grew up playing violin at 6th grade all the way through high school. I played violin. You can see it on the wall behind me. And as though I'm not I haven't kept those skills as strong as I would like, that orchestral nature has never left me. As we've talked about before on some other things, I grew up listening to movie scores. That was kind of my musical upbringing, was movie scores and classic rock. And so this is definitely playing homage to some of those initial sounds that really got me interested in music in the first place. This big, grand kind of sounds. So we have our piano chords, we have our piano leads. We've heard how those have been blending in with the drums. Now let's talk about a little bit about these space dinks. I call them that because, again, as we talked about a little bit in Anger, there's always an element of sci-fi, of space. I mean, I'm a big nerd. I got a rocket ship and the pulsar map on my arms. So I love space. This album is space. So there's got to be an element of that spread throughout the whole thing. So these space dinks accomplish that. You can hear them as they come in. And you can tell why I call them space dinks. They're little dinky, kind of like plucks almost. And they add a nice kind of reverb. There's a spatialness to them inside of these space dinks. And then that melody is picked up by our harp later on when we get into this breakdown. So we've talked about the drums. We've talked about our chords and our space dinks. We could not go much further without getting into this orchestra. The orchestra is hands down the biggest part of this entire fucking song, and it all comes from this plugin right here. This is the BBC Symphony Orchestra by Spitfire Labs. I think it's it's one of their trimmed down models. I got this, I think, for $25. It's available right now. I just checked before making this for $50. It is phenomenal. This is absolute wonderful samples from the BBC Symphony Orchestra. I've used this plugin many a time. It was on the last album. It was on this album. It will most likely be on the next album. Even if it's not necessarily the focus, you can get some phenomenal textures in here. So just really quickly showing you this plugin, you can see it. I can pick from a variety of different sections, and the really honestly something I love about the way that they recorded this is naturally as you select through these, you're going to have the parts somewhat panned. So if you were to select a section from each bit, you would have naturally through the plugin, it would be panned out and sounding a bit more mixed like a full orchestra would. So if you have any kind of orchestral experience and you're not necessarily wanting to drop like $500+ on a huge orchestral plugin, this is a phenomenal one to get in. I've talked about Spitfire Audio with their Labs plugins, that soft piano I use all the time. I love their shit. So yeah, you got to use this plugin. Check it out. If you're interested in making some big orchestral pieces, $50. You can actually also even get it for free if you're like in education or something. They have an ability. I don't know fully what that process is like, but you can apply for a free license, which, you know, good on them. I love me some Spitfire Audio. I'll shout them out as many times as I can. So in here, we have from our orchestra, we have a cello section, we have violins 1 and 2. If you're unfamiliar with orchestral music, typically you have violin 1s taking the lead parts, and your violin 2s are playing more so the rhythmic nature or sort of a B melody, a counter melody. We have some horns, big old brassy things. I love me some horns. And then those tubular bells that we've used back in Children of Earth, as well as throughout the whole album. Like I said, it's one of those motifs that comes up regularly throughout the whole thing. And then our harp, which is primarily used in the breakdown, which I was talking about. So let's go ahead and start by just soloing these cellos and listening to what's happening here. And you can see in the waveform that the right side is favored a bit more than the left. And that's what I was talking about. Some of that pre-mixing already done. Then I kind of further balanced it a bit more to the right, just to really create some individual sections within the channels of your stereo field where all of the frequencies can play and interact with themselves in a wonderful place. So that's our cellos. The next element that we bring in is our horns. They really sound great. The sampling they've used in these plugins are phenomenal. And I've got a fair bit of EQ on these horns. Like I said, this orchestral section in general was a lot of time spent mixing. This track probably has the most amount of mixing hours in it, just because of how in depth and how intricate the frequency shifting can be when you bring in sort of a full orchestral and you're trying to blend it in with all of these other elements. If I had, out of all of the tracks on the album, if I had a week longer, a couple days longer, that's always the thing in creatives. If I had this time, this little bit more, if I had a week more, whatever, I would have definitely continued working on this. But there's also a point where as a creative, you have to realize, look, I could work on this forever. Like Golden Record is a project that I very much could have continued working on for like a decade, if not longer, just because the scope continuously got bigger and larger, and I was constantly trying to adapt to that. But inevitably, there is a moment where you kind of just need to step back and go, great, this is the best it's going to be at this moment in time. I may as well put this out there so that I can get to work on the next thing. Because the longer you sit on something, the more and more you just kind of start nitpicking every little detail. And eventually you're just going to be so focused on every little thing that you'll be so lost in the weeds you won't be able to take a step back and be like, no, this is worth putting out, let's drop this whole thing. So that was very much the case of this. I could have mixed this orchestra section for until the cows come home, whatever kind of metaphor you want to use. I could have done it for forever, but we had to take a step out, realize that it's as best as we're going to get it at this time, at this period in my life, and put it out there. I'm definitely, don't get me wrong, I'm so happy with this final product. I'm really am. But as a creative, the perfectionist in me, there's always that little extra bit that I wish I could do a little bit more. I'm sure many of you will be able to resonate, that resonates with y'all as well. So we've heard the horns soloed, but listen to what happens when you bring in the horns and the cello together. And this is really where the magic of this orchestral layering starts to happen. Like, hello, Hans Zimmerman with the cellos and the horns, it's my shit. So then the next element that we bring in is our violins. So we have our violin ones and our violin twos, and they're playing very similar parts, just a bit, a few semitones, a few octaves down, complementary, harmonizing with each other. But we'll go ahead and listen to the violins on their own. So pretty. And then we bring in our second violins, and you can hear how they're a little further panned to the right. So if you're listening with some good headphones, you should be able to tell that, there's a bit more stereo space being used over here, which means there's more room over here. And that's where you can tell where the horns and the bells exist, because they have that, they're panned a bit further to the left. So let's talk about these bells, some big old tubular bells. I love me some bells. And the sample on these, like the way the VST, the plugin, man, they nailed it. It sounds so realistic. I love these bells. It's hard pressed to find a plugin where you can't tell there's a bit of sampling going on. But man, as I work through these bells, every time I play with them, it's like, gosh, it sounds like I sampled this myself. Like I recorded this and I love it. And then our final section of our orchestral bits is this harp. And then we'll go back through and talk a bit more about how all of these blend together with everything else. So let's listen to the harp soloed on its own. Remember, it's the exact same melody of our space stinks. So we'll go back to the space stinks. See? Back to the heart. And the idea again with that is we're presenting ideas, carrying them forward in a different way so that you as an audience member don't get bored. And then we bring back those more familiar ideas we'd introduced earlier. And that gives you a sense of sort of completing the sentence, the thought as it were. Or also, remember, this whole fucking album is sci-fi. We got to have the space. The space exists within it all. So there's always a little bit of that. And then that is really how everything forms together. So we've got our drums, the orchestral section, and our piano all working simultaneously together to create quite the impactful track. So let's listen to just a little, we'll hop around through some of all of these things built in together where you can sort of see the interplay between all of them. Like, for example, when we get rid of our big drum moment for the first time. It might help if I properly, unmute things. There we go. All right, now let's listen to this big drum moment. And then we're left with the claps. Let you hear these horns a little more. And again, we take stuff away before we add it back in. So now we bring in these violins. And because we don't have the drums, that's one of those moments where my computer gets a little scared. So because we don't have those drums in there, those violins stand out that much more and allow us to create more space for this, where the drums come back in. You're more familiar with the piece at this point because you've heard those violins come in earlier. We add in those violin twos, and that creates really cool layering. Then as we move forward into our breakdown moment, I'll go out of it so you can hear the space dinks end and hear the harp take over. See, and then in there, we use a very classic kind of EDM technique of just speeding up this kick in different intervals to lead up to a more impactful drop and big final moment, as you can hear when we listen to that. Big old thing. Big old thing. And yeah, as I've said before, this song was hella resource heavy. I had to all of this, as you can see, because we were using the plugin that I showed you at the top, all of this was MIDI, and I had to flatten it and flatten it and flatten it into audio to make it more mixable and workable, because when everything was still in its MIDI state and I would try and hit play on this track, man, my computer's CPU usage would go through the roof. I'd get all kinds of crazy dropouts. It was a lot to work on, which is one of the reasons why it took so long to mix this track, was that I was basically having to constantly sort of render and re-render this audio to make sure that things were sounding as they should. But all of that together, we got the drums, we got the orchestra, and we got all of our wonderful piano chords, which leads to a huge impactful moment and eventually takes us out and into a little more controlled finish, heading us into the weight that you carry. So let's just listen to that final outro one more time. Maybe. This is what I was talking about. My computer, whoo boy, it's a lot. So maybe we'll just listen to this last little bit. I just really left with the orchestra at the end. Maybe. Oh, my poor computer. You can do it, buddy. Keep chugging. Bless you. All right, and that's enough torture for my poor CPU. Let's go ahead and move into this outro. So that was track 10 off of the album Propulsion, a big orchestral piece with some fat, heavy drums, and man, was it fun to work on this track. Coming up after the weekend, we're going to be back on Monday with The Weight That You Carry, another instrumental track that's definitely Western inspired, a bit of Red Dead in there. But until then, enjoy the weekend, keep listening to the album, and I'll catch y'all on the next one.